Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and the fifth in our Masters of the Air specials. And we're talking about the epic imagery created for the series. I'm joined by Visual Effects Supervisor Stephen Rosenbaum to take us through the process. How are you today, Stephen?
Awesome. Really good. Glad to be here.
So we've got lots of images and stuff we're going to display later on. But having spoken to John and Donald Miller, when you obviously got this gig a number of years ago, what process did you go through to familiarize yourself with the 8th Air Force and B-17s and P-51s? What books did you read? How did you set about that?
God, it was a hard study, actually. I think everybody growing up, well, for me at least, I was a Cars kid. They were my friends. Some of them were planes kids. I was a Cars kid, so I didn't have a in-depth fantasy with planes, and so I had to study up. And the first place I started, of course, was Don's book. Yep. The second stop was the Bible that I think John Orloff showed you. He had like a 250 page. So that was that got me really deep into it. But then I needed to study the nuances of aviation history, especially during World War II. So there were a lot of books I read. I have Jane's Fighting Aircraft right there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that, stuff like that. I just went through, what else is there? The Rand McNally. I basically pilfered any books I could. My father-in-law was an aeronautical engineer, worked on the moon landing, actually, and so he was an aviation nut. So I would steal books from him and read up. But I actually the best education I had was, believe it or not, online. There's a just endless wealth of YouTubes that you can watch. Personal histories. In the Cold Blue is a fantastic reference.
Amazing. Yeah.
There's just basically a deep dive into it. Very quickly had to come up to speed. It was interesting, actually, during initially when I came on the show, actually just prior to, this is December 2020. So we're pretty much still in the thick of COVID here. And COVID is peaking pretty much, or near peaking. They were originally talking about doing blue screen for a lot of the work. And I had a long background in virtual production. So they were asking, what could we do? And we started talking about the LED walls, which we can discuss more in a minute. But that sort of set the tone for, okay, it's not a matter of me like figuring it out later in post. I really need to get into it now. If we're going to be on set, we're going to be there, helping working with Ty, who you spoke with, and working with the other advisors and the researchers and understanding the material, and then producing proxy content essentially for the actors to respond to, for the cameramen to react to, and so forth. Then we needed to get it right, and we needed to learn that we needed a quick schooling essentially on it.
So basically, for those of us who are less familiar with how a modern TV show or film works, because I think people watching, they have a sense of storyboards, and I'm one of my great friends, was an art director years and years ago, and he had all these drawings. He worked on Empire Strikes Back and things like that. Mm-hmm. But it's a modern world now, where, as you said there, the LED screen. So sort of give us a potted kind of understanding of just how the hell this process works in the kind of layman's terms. And you've got some great imagery, hopefully we'll share.
Yeah, I do. Let me just, I'm gonna just share my screen real quick here. Entire screen there. Boom. So it started with the art department, and I think people will find this kind of interesting. This art department prepped these mission books for every single episode. So this is an example, episode 3. And I can step through it, but it talked about all the details that we needed to get right per that specific episode for all the planes. So something people need to understand, and we can get into this later in discussion, is one of the key concepts of filmmaking, or putting up, making anything in terms of storytelling, is it has to be enjoyable to watch, but it also have to be consistent with the look of the shots, shot to shot in an edit. For our case, it was particularly complex because, these planes would go on a mission, they get battered, and then, progressively get more and more beat up. we had to track, what the state of each plane was through it. But the art department laid out these. So these were all the missions that we did, and then specifically in EP3 it was the Regensburg mission. So they would lay out the flight path. We'd get into the formation chart, so we'd see where the 100th was and in relation to the entire wing. And then, the specific roster for the 100th, and that day was the 418th in the lead, the 350th in the low, and the 349th, and some of the 351st in the high. And then, we had all the planes with their names, and then, how they were positioned in formation in each squadron. We had weather reports, so we understood, where, for our purposes and actually for shooting the actors, what was the light? Was it sunny? Was it 5 out of 10 cloud? Was it 10 out of 10 cloud? Was it 1 out of 10, so forth? And then we went into specific plane detail. And then anyway, it goes on and on and on. But just to give you a sense of that, we even got into the level of minutiae, like we needed to understand all the markings. So if you go through in the show, you'll see that all the serial numbers, all the squadron codes, everything is precise. There was a great book we found by this guy Wallace Foreman, who went through and detailed all the all of the planes. So you can see, like, here I have marked Argos and the 100th. Squadron was 350th, and then the tail code, the serial number. And then the no or yes meant whether or not it had like nose art and things like that. So anyway, it was quite elaborate. The big question, as I was touching on a moment ago, was like, how, when we go into shooting this, as everybody knows, the effects are always done in post, but we need the actors to respond to to some stimuli, right? Rather than putting them on a blue screen or a green screen, we needed to give them something more, a little more substantive. So we developed this, and it has been used a little bit on some of these recent shows, but with my background in virtual production, well, I brought in a team called Lux Machina, and they basically, we were up in north of London shooting in these converted warehouses, and we needed to build these giant LED walls, and they had done it on Mandalorian, they had done it on other shows. So we built these huge LED walls. You can see like a crude previs projected here, and it has a ceiling up here. And these set pieces were essentially sections of the B-17. So you can see the flight deck and the nose compartment here. And it's situated on a 10-ton motion axis, which was provided by Neil Corbold, who we worked a lot with, the special effects team. And they actually had a what's called a Waldo, which meant that they could essentially puppeteer this motion base, so that the actors could be sitting in the cockpit and they could feel the plane rolling to starboard or heaving, pitching upwards to take off, so forth, and they could essentially react to it. And then additionally, and I think quite importantly, which is not done in most movies involving airplanes, is the vibration. You notice that everybody's always sitting there perfectly still, but these things they shake a lot. You're doing this. It's just like riding a truck, right? So they added that element of vibration, and if you see it, it's very subliminal, but it's effective. It not only helps with their performance, but you see all the oxygen hoses and so forth. Everything's shaking, right? It's moving, which brings a lot of life to it. So I'll play this real quick. This is just a really crude test here, but this is I'll just stop for a second. We use previs. We didn't go into what we call final pixel content. We just used previs to play back. So it's really cartoony, but it was there. We had to produce almost 7 hours of previs in order to do this, or 7 hours of content. And there's no way we could get it to a final pixel level in time for shooting. So we opted just to pre-visit all and then play that back, and that was completely adequate, because planes could actors could see planes going by and so forth. But this is just a simple takeoff, so it's all distorted here because it's on a horseshoe shaped wall here. But if you look carefully, you can see the axis, the motion base is shaking a little bit, and then it lifts up for a takeoff as it elevates, and then you have coverage angles, with cameras on the actors, and they could get that sensation of a takeoff and so forth. So a simple example, but very effective. This is what they might see. Like this is the interior view. This is just me and my iPhone sitting inside in the co-pilot seat. But let me turn off the volume. If some German fighters are coming by, they would just swing by, and then if this were a co-pilot POV, let me just loop that. The actor is following the fighters, right, naturally, and then as in response, the cameraman is also following what the actors. So if the actor's like doing what I'm doing, which is my point of view, I'm tilting up and looking left, the camera could do the same essentially and follow the actors. So you had all the timing precise. So we of course made sure that our airspeed is correct, that German fighter airspeed is correct, and so in terms of the precision was right. This was an example. This was an example of this was a test actually. It's not a shot here, but to show you the ball turret, and we had sort of this little portable LED walls. And it's actually not playing back in this test, so I apologize. But when we were shooting, you would have German fighters swinging by, and then you have the ball turret shooting. Now the camera is sitting. I don't know if you can make it out. It's pretty small, but it's sitting right on the strapped essentially between the two 50 cals, right, pointed at the actor inside the ball turret. So it's looking at him like this. And essentially because he's following real planes, I'm not playing back the actual content here, unfortunately, but you imagine planes going by, he's reacting, his eyes are tracking the planes, he's got the 50 cals going, and he gets the complete response. So long-winded answer to your question is that these were key to the LED walls, were key to helping us, but there was a lot to it. You can kind of get a better sense of the wall here and all the scaffolding that went around it. Oftentimes we would have 6 or 8 cameras strapped to the planes, inside, down inside the dashboard, and or the dash there, and looking up at the actors, and then some, on the port and starboard windows and so forth. So you'd get the full reaction, of both pilots and so forth. Anyway.
It strikes me, Stephen, that kind of synchronicity between pilot and co-pilot looking in the same direction, the camera following and tracking their movements, that's the kind of thing that us, the viewers, aren't likely to notice that it's correct, but we would notice it if it was wrong.
That's right.
And that with all the rivet counters that we've been talking about, they're noticing things that are there, but they're not noticing how much stuff is working behind the scenes to make it just feel right. You say the vibration, and while you had that, the photos on screen there, is it worth mentioning the elephant in the room of the choice not to use B-17Gs? Because that's been let's deal with that.
So first of all, just for your audience purpose, please bring it. I so badly want to talk about this because not just the G, but there's a ton of stuff I can point out. Actually, there's some stuff that people haven't even flagged yet that I'll mention. Like Wild Cargo shouldn't have had nose art on his first mission, things like that. I mentioned already, Macon rolling to starboard instead of, or maybe I didn't mention it. I mean, I was mentioning it before, in Toulon, somebody pointed out, it's like, it's like totally wrong. He gets shot on he gets his port wing clipped and he starts rolling to the starboard. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But we shot the actor first on a motion base. Let me show you that real quick. I'll get to. I'll answer your question in a second, Paul. Sorry, I went off topic, but
no, it's all good. We love how this is going.
See if I can. Yeah, here you go.
Right, there we go.
So here's, you guys can see this, right?
Yep.
So we had access to two P51Ds, and I can talk about that too. And they, I know people were talking about the bubble canopy versus the birdcage canopy in the sea and so forth. Yes, I know. But what we had available as a real plane, and we were very much wanted, as Ty was mentioning, it was totally unrealistic to fly a real B-17, but we had real P-51s. So we wanted to fly real P-51s, and the only ones we had were the Ds. And so that meant that we then had to back in for continuity purposes into the D. There was no other reason other than that. We just had to, say, well, we could be technically correct and just fly with the C, with the birdcage canopy, and not have real plane reference, or we could say, let's just go with the D. And everybody's like, let's do the D. And I can talk about the HVARs and all that too. But anyway, so we built a set piece of the P-51D. And this is what it looked like. And it was up against the wall. You can see there's no content displayed on it right now. But it had a different motion base, so it could pitch, yaw, and roll. Anyway, that was the reason for that. And but coming back to, I'll come back to Toulon in a second. But you asked the question about the B-17G. So it was the same thing. Let me just see if I have, yeah, here it is. Sorry. Too many things. One second.
Hang off every word, don't worry.
I'll play this in a second, but I happen to have this is sort of a compilation of our work. So this is the shot you were talking about. So or these shots, right? So it's, EP9, which has dropped today or dropped last night. Some of you may have already seen it. Yes, they're the silver B-17s. They should be the G. They should have the chin turret. I know. But we had, when we were shooting, it was the same type of thing where we had full scale models of the B-17F, and let me see if I can pull it up. It looked like this. Let me just go back. So this is just me on my iPhone. So this is the B-17F. This was one of our full scale models. One of them, this one, had little motors. If you look on the interior side of the main wheels, the front wheels, they have little motors strapped to them. So it allowed it to basically park on a hard stand or a taxi down a taxiway. But the idea of retrofitting, we were very late in the day, and we can talk a little bit about that in a minute, but we were very late in the day on shooting our schedule. And the idea of strapping a chin turret here, we could have plugged up the plexi on the front, but it would have meant probably replacing the plexi because it shouldn't have had the nose gun. There are in the G, are these flanges on the windows that are different. So there's little, some cosmetic things that we could have had the art department do, but this was like November, December of 22, and we were supposed to actually wrap in September. So just to give you a sense of where our schedule was with COVID. So basically, we had myself and Stuart Heath, who built these. He's part of BGI, who runs BGI, and he built these two full scale, beautiful, right down to the rivet. He had the actual Boeing schematics, the blueprints. So it was very, very accurate. And I can talk about that too, because I did scan these and also scan Memphis Belle and did an A/B comparison, and it was like millimeters difference. It was really, really precise. But it did things like, you know, the cow flaps didn't move and things like that. The props did not move; they were just static and so forth. But anyway, we had a conversation. We approached the producers, and they said, look, you know, it's probably like a 2-week turnaround to add those features to the F, essentially, to make it look like a G. And they're like, we just don't have the time or the money. We can't. We're like full steam towards the end. We needed to wrap before Christmas, and the idea of like reorganizing the show. This was episode 9 at this point. Just was not a non-starter. So it was basically just a production decision that happens on the day. And so at that point, then that meant that in post, I had to back into where did I have it? The F model, essentially.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So the minimum thing we did, and I convinced them to do, was to paint. It's the F, the real F, silver. So it kind of looked like a G, but you know, your guys, everybody knows this is a silver F, and we know it. But that's what we had to do. So it was really just a decision to.
And this is what probably worth mentioning at this point, is that I'm assuming that Apple TV aren't making these decisions based on the 2 or 3% of viewers globally who will know things like the details of chin turrets on aircraft. It's a global product for a global audience. So although it's important to get it right, the World War II TV viewers aren't really who you're aiming at, is it? Although you want to get as many things correct as you can.
That's right. I mean, fair enough. But we and I think John and Ty were stressing this as well. I mean, we were very much, you know, focused on trying to be as precise as we could. And, you know, I think 95% of it is pretty spot on. I know like the HVARs, we didn't have HVARs, or actually, I don't know for sure. Somebody commented about that in Ep 8 with the red tails attacking Toulon. the HVARs, I believe, historically they came into play around D-Day, and so that was June of 44. The Toulon raid was August of 44, so it's conceivable. But you know, we weren't sure about that. But the fact of the matter was, again, that point was a creative decision where. Well, I'll pull up in Toulon in a second, and we can talk about that, all the little creative things and why I made certain decisions. Let me finish the thought about this. So I'll just play this to kind of give people a sense of, you know, what goes into it. This is a reel I have put together. I'll play the whole thing in a second, but just for this shot. So yes, silver B-17Fs, but still effective, right? I mean, it looks good. And yes, I know the quality of the CG looks way better in 9. And that, again, we can talk about that. I'm happy to address that. I'm very much aware. If people know, look back at my work, you know, my standards are pretty high. So there were reasons why, and a lot of it had to do largely with the scope and complexity of the project.
And as an artist, like, and you know, I know, you know, literally oil painters, you have to hand over that canvas at some point. You have to go, okay, either budget or timing or both, and you have to hand it over. But of course, there's always one little last check you could do and one little retweak, and can we just change that and can we just amend that? But you know, as you said yourself, so much time, so much effort, hundreds of people involved in this. I think people don't really always understand the complexity and enormity of this task.
Yeah, let me give you some context. So when we started shooting, roughly around summer of 21, so we're in the height of COVID. I think Ty or John might have mentioned this. My day, everybody's day, was wake up in the morning, go online. Do you have a fever? Do you have aches? So forth. No. Go to work. You're met in the parking lot by somebody who sticks a temperature gun at your forehead and says, right, you're good. Here's a red wristband. Go get tested. You go and get a PCR test. You go and sit in your car for an hour and a half waiting for a text to say, come and get your green wristband to start work. So that was every day. then you're wearing a mask all day, every day, whether you're shooting on stage or where you're out in the Abingdon airfield, out in the air, because we're in the midst of COVID and most people are not vaccinated at this point, and we couldn't risk people, the shutdowns. So inevitably, there were shutdowns because people had weekends, and they might intermingle with somebody who got it, and unfortunately there was contact tracing. So if the third AD came back positive Monday morning, that means the entire AD department would go home for 10 days essentially. And so we progressively got further behind schedule. Then we started breaking into multiple units in order to sort of offset that. And with that becomes more people and more complexity. So when you're looking at a project like this, which is more than 9 hours of content, you can be sure that there's going to be 3 to 4 times as much work that was shot, right? So it's because we have multiple cameras set up, and so you're talking about more and more people. The more units you're putting on, and the more content you're shooting, you're no longer in a sort of a linear workflow. You're now starting to be stepping on each other in terms of who's demanding cameras for what and so forth. So it was complicated. Plus just the complexity, if you think about when we're shooting this continually, like, okay, we're jumping in episode 3, we're jumping between 4 cockpits essentially, right? We've got Kidd and Blakely in one, we've got Egan and Cruikshank in another, we've got Biddick and Snyder in the third, and then we've got Clevin in the fourth. And so and positionally, where are they? So we had the walls, so they could understand, okay, I see the lead plane is over here. If I'm in Clevin's plane, I understand. If I'm in the low. But it is very, very complicated to understand that. And then anyway, we walk away at the end of that. We finish essentially Christmas of 21. Essentially a few months behind because of the delays and just the scope of the project. And now we've got to make something of it in post. There was not a clear understanding schedule-wise from the beginning of post in terms of what we had. We really needed to assemble the cuts and get it together and sit down and have a look. And in fact, when we did that, we saw that essentially it was more than twice of what we had anticipated in terms of the complexity and the volume of work. So that meant the delays and so forth. Couple that with, again, we're still in COVID and nobody's going into the office anymore, right? So all of my teams, my vendors, I had 13 vendors on the show. But you can go to their offices like I would do typically on most shows. And you sit down and work with the artists and work with the supervisors, and you kind of figure out problems, and you do a lot of arm waving and this is right, this is wrong. But you didn't have that anymore. You had everybody working from home. So we like to use the phrase, I'm sure everybody's heard, herding cats, but now you've got herding cats that are no longer in the same room, right? And so it got complicated, and the fact that we got it as right as we could, given all those circumstances, is kind of miraculous, honestly. And believe me, I am sickened by, I know all the little problems. There's probably something that I missed that somebody will flag for me, and I'm welcome it. I mean, I don't have any ego about it, but I know that there were a lot of creative compromises that we just couldn't get to, as you allude. So it's true. I mean, we just had to do it as we could. The other variable too, which contributed to it, was continuity, and I touched on this as well, like the Macon rolling starboard and so forth. D-Day, nobody's caught this yet, but I'll just flag it. We had 2 shots in D-Day. We wanted it to make it bigger, but there was a creative thought that this was sufficient since Rosie. It was a narration from Rosie. The sun position's in the completely wrong place. It's the sun is in the northern sky in the shot, right? If you think about it, the whole shot should be flopped.
Oh, I'll notice that now. Thanks, Stephen.
But it was only because again, this is, these are the little idiosyncrasies of film production, right? When you're putting together something, you have a shot where we're over Rosie's shoulder as he looks out the window, right? He's in the pilot seat and he looks left, right? Looks port out the window at all the ships on the water and so forth, and all the other planes in the sky, and the sun is out there, right? Well, we all know that we're traveling west to east on this, so the sun should be on the other side. But we had the way the plate was lit, and frankly, aesthetically, it's nicer to have all those ships backlit on the water because you'll see them more clearly. If they were front lit, they would be more lost against the bright water. So there were, creative and technical reasons, but I know this. I know the rockets. Let's talk about the rockets for a second. First of all, whether or not they were, we knew that they were not guided rockets, and they should have been, fired from, typically they're fired from 6 o'clock. We know that, the fighters typically hung back, and they would, pace the B-17s, and then, at the opportune time, they would sort of aim into a squadron. And from a 6 o'clock roughly position. But again, when we're shooting this and we're seeing in context of the cut, we didn't always want to be jumping back to a tail gunner POV, right? Where, most of the dialogue is happening in the flight deck or in the nose and so forth. So you're with those actors. So you kind of have to see somebody calling out, the tail gunner is going, or maybe it's the waist gunner saying, rockets 3 o'clock or whatever. And then you're with Egan, who's in the co-pilot seat, and he looks to his right to 3 o'clock, right? And you want to see rockets. So there's, again, storytelling. It's part of the compromises we make. And so, yes, I know that rockets typically come from 6 o'clock, but it's like, come on, we have to tell a story. You have to service the story. And that's just part of the game. So and
that's the point John made. The story comes first, and perhaps we can do that. Put the video bit on a loop there. But I want to bring it back to what you were saying about the getting the feel of it right, because some of the older productions 20 years ago, the physics all felt wrong. No names mentioned, but Red Tails by George Lucas. The aircraft doing things they just couldn't do. To me, as a non-aviation person, everything in the air, particularly, it felt right. The aircraft pretty much felt the right weights. The speeds were good. How do you get all that? Obviously, you can program in certain things if the speed of a Focke-Wulf, so you can kind of consider how do you just get that three-dimensional environment to look and feel correct?
Let me answer one question because if it goes by, because I just remember something. Sorry, Paul, just real quick.
No worries.
This is a little Easter egg for everybody. That's Piccadilly Lily right there.
Right.
So it's never played never featured anywhere, but I knew that she was in the 351st, I believe. And we're actually in the 351st location. There's a control tower. So I stuck her in. To answer your question, we spent a lot of time referencing historical material, and basically I had the animators tracking real planes essentially from historical footage. If you follow the natural flight dynamics of a B-17 or even a P-51 for that matter, there's a certain bob to their motion. There's very, very subtle adjustments and so forth that I think most animators, if they just stuck a plane in the sky, it would be very linear and flying from A to B. So doing those, getting the flight dynamics right was key. And I would even say, we didn't, there's definitely some animation that's, I think, is not as accurate. But there are, for the most part, we tried to follow pretty accurately. I'm going to stop this for a second because I want to show you an example. Somebody commented about Toulon. This was the reference we had. So we shot two P-51s shooting, and they were talking about like dropping the fuel tanks. And when I saw it, I was like, really? Because I had no awareness of how they actually wiggled their wings in order to do that. And so we had them demo it, and this is a real P-51D doing that action. So it's so to answer your question, we had the animators essentially follow this. It's what we call rotomate, which is basically frame to frame animation of that action to be precise. It looks weird. It looks like bad animation, but it's real. That's what it does. That's not to say, again, I admit not all the animation, the flight dynamics are right. We had, I think, 150 animators on the show. So you're not going to get, perfect animation for everybody. In fact, at the height of the show, we had over 1,000 people working on it, just because of, again, the scope of the show and the schedule demands. And that definitely factored in. You can see here, there's we even made the effort to do real stunt work.
Right.
So this is a stuntman in full flight gear with, of course, his real modern parachute attached to it, because we wanted to make sure we got that motion correctly, flying through the air. And Quinn jumps here and some of the other shots. Anyway, did I answer your question?
You did, absolutely. And I think to move on from the obvious brilliance of the air scenes, is what are the ground scenes are the ones that you're particularly proud of? Things that perhaps people wouldn't notice at first glance as being special effects shots. I'm thinking of the Prison of War Camps. You just showed the sequence of the train there. Is there any particular sequence over the 9 episodes that you're very proud of?
The environment work was really well done. I'll just give you some context. So again, in COVID, land of COVID, we had originally planned to go to certain locations, like certain villages in Europe and around, to go to their actual locations and shoot there. So you had, but because of COVID, we couldn't leave the country. So we were forced to basically build sets. And it was a huge collaboration. Again, Chris Seegers was the production designer. He just a brilliant mind. I mean, really, really clever with how he created it. So this is an example here where we went to a town in southwestern England. Actually, it's just not too far from London. And he would spec out, what we needed to do to make it look Belgian. So adding certain architectural features, the typical, like the stair-steppy silhouette of the roofline was, typical Belgian, the certain style of roofs and white paint and so forth. By the way, I don't know, most people probably didn't notice these 2 dead bodies here. But so we would shoot a plate like this, and then he'd give it to us and give us basically specs for how we needed to fill in the street. You'll see another one in a second, I think, coming right after this. Here's and then the other side of it. So he was very, very clever with that. So I would say, throughout the series, the work was pretty consistent. You'll see even just something like this. This is a callback to Band of Brothers, but this is these are all digital. These characters here, all the housing and so forth. This was supposed to be just an English village, so we had a plate. It was really a quick grab that we had of a guy running down the bicycle with this open field. And then we filled it all in with CG elements and just added the planes leaving, essentially going home. We can talk about the flak and all that in a second. You can see what we had to do to mess up the planes. But in terms of environments, like here we had, starting with here, this was our plate. So we had 4 barracks. and then some guard towers, and then some fence line, and then just open field. So this was shot just south of the stages on an airfield north of London. And then we had to fill it out. But again, all the detail provided precisely by art department, Chris Seeger's team. He had some amazing researchers, Jess Bradbury and is a coordinator, Sophie Moelle. You could just say, that shot of Tuskegee Airman sitting on a plane, and Sophie would just like pull it up. But they had detail for all of this, and fortunately, it was all well documented. So he just provided maps for us, and I then relayed it on to our team, and they would build out the barracks and populate the backgrounds essentially with digi characters. So you can see, like, here's Moosburg, Stalag Luft 7, which you'll see in episode 9. But even night scenes like this, we only had so many people, so we had to populate the foregrounds. By the way, I'm going to digress for a second. These tracers, I have a reference somewhere, but I have some great footage of like P-47 strafing. And what I really liked about it is, from a filmmaking perspective, is it focuses the eye. So I intentionally added a lot of that, and I can get into that kind of detail with some of it, because somebody commented about contrails and so forth. But it's really kind of to service the stories where I'm basically telling the viewer where to look when I'm.
Well, that came up with I think some of the aircraft being too many fireballs. I think someone said about episode 3 or something. But the fact that you're a conductor of an orchestra with us, your musicians, you're wanting us to look at certain places. Otherwise, it's just an array of stuff happening. So you're trying to compose that screen to follow us into a particular area. So I'm that the fact you're saying that you're using things like tracer to direct our vision is really enlightening. Thank you.
Yeah, same with contrails and other action, which I can flag for people. But if you look at a shot like this, it's just a lot of noise, right? People's eyes are going to be everywhere. Where do I look? So I'm basically telling you, I'm forcing you to look right down at the middle here at the oncoming, because in the following shot, we're gonna jump down to the reverse angle, which I don't have here. But if people recall, actually, I haven't seen 9 yet, but the camera is down here in the following angle, and it's taking out the little emplacement that's on top of the roof here, and then this tower, and then spinning off. So again, from a filmmaking standpoint, storytelling, we're trying to make sure the audience doesn't get lost, right? So I know I'm here, and then I'm coming down to the ground to the reverse angle and so forth. This is actually something interesting. This is again episode 9. March through Nuremberg. This is the Congress ground and the Zeppelin field, which is infamous in the Olympics, 1932, I believe. The geography is not quite right. The Zeppelin field is actually this is 180. It should be 180 the other way, but we put it in here just as a sort of a subliminal thing. So people don't get lost. But there's a ton of extension work. Even like here, Zabako, again, episode 9, people will be shocked by that. Down in Tunisia, damaged B-17s. These foregrounds were shot just at an Abington off in a corner, and just we needed to strip it all out and make it look like Africa. This was a good example of like an environment extension. Art department created the town of Rüsselsheim. I think it's how you pronounce it, Rüsselsheim. But you can see what they built, and then I stuck blue screen back there to extend. Same with bombing out London. Again, down in Talergma. Even in, again, the EP9, a lot of environments, they're flying over Holland. We did do some aerial work, but some of this had to be entirely fabricated. So this is an example. So to make it look Dutch, obviously the obligatory windmills, putting in the gun emplacements down here, the flak guns, and then the village that we're approaching, that we ultimately fly over for Operation Chowhound. This was a real thing. It was a Dutch famine. Dutch were starving. A really nice aerial plate that we pilfered to add towards the end. So lots of environment extensions, and I think that's in terms of production value. I think that's one thing people should appreciate, I think, is that we're going to dozens and dozens of locations. We're not just stuck at Thorpe Abbott's this entire time. We made a point of going. We went. If you think about it, besides on the missions, on the grounds, we were in Holland, we were in Germany, a few different, like a handful of different locations in Germany, France, obviously, Belgium, so forth. So we tried to really deliver on all that.
Brilliant. Well, we've got a few actual specific questions from viewers. So Ian Carr asked a few minutes ago, the ball turrets, were they life-size or slightly larger, allowing for modern people and sizes?
Good question. Everything was to scale 1-to-1. So it was something we talked about. Should we make them larger? But it was really, actually, I think Cary Fukunaga, the director of the first 4 episodes, it's like, no, we want the actors to feel what it was like. And I know some of you guys have been in a B-17. It's really cramped. I'm a slight guy. I'm 5'9". I could barely get into the ball turret myself. It was funny. I tried one day, and then I had stunt Lee Morrison, the stunt supervisor, there spotting me, and he's grabbing my head and he's trying to push me down, work me into it. And I could barely get into it. It's really cramped in there, but that was the idea, is to feel, the tightness of it, the claustrophobia, the big 250 cals that are right there, blowing in your ears. We wanted it to experience that at a 1-to-1 scale, or actual scale.
Thank you. And talking of 50 cals, well connected there. Soylent Green is asking, how did you do the 50 caliber recoil for the bomber crews? Were they electrically recoiling, or were you actually firing blanks, or a bit of everything?
A bit of everything. I think I have a demo here. Yeah, this is SFX doing some testing. Let me go back to the beginning. I'll turn off.
That is hot! Yes! Come forward!
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it answers the question. And I think that this is the realization. I wanted to get you to confirm that it's not all done in computer. There were a lot of on-set practical effects. I think some people think that these days it's just these sort of computer geeks living in their parents' basements doing all this stuff, and it's far from it. What Ty was showing on Tuesday.
Yeah,
it's a multi discipline approach to this.
Yeah, it's not how I like to work. Every show I do, I want to leverage the real thing, the live action. Because there's nothing that beats that, honestly. There are some cases where we had to fabricate everything CG. I mean, if you saw this, for example, I just stopped here for that reason. It's like we needed Paris and we couldn't go there because of COVID. And so we had to create everything digitally. And so sometimes there's, the train, everything in this shot is 100% CG, and it looks pretty fucking good. Had I preferred to go to Paris and shoot the real thing? Yeah, but we couldn't. So we just had to. But for the most part, we're always trying to leverage the real thing. Even like, I'll show you, this is kind of fun while we're on this effects. Sorry. This was called the rotisserie rig. this is another rig that Neil Corbold built for SFX Special Effects. You can see it's the nose, the Bombay, and or it looks like the radio room and maybe part of the waist. But it's on this rig that spirals basically. So when they're going down in episode 3 and Quinn is being thrown around, it's not just the camera spinning around. We really wanted the actor to be churned around. So we wanted to get the real thing. So you had the full on effect of that. By the way, look, red tails, P51Ds. That's a C. That's a D. That's a C. And then another thing, that Toulon raid, I know, was 16 planes, right? 4 squadrons. We only had 1 squadron. There was a reason for that, but we don't have time for that. But anyway, I know.
So how do you take the criticism personally? I mean, you said you don't mind, addressing these problems. I mean, you have to hand in the project. We established that, and now it's in the ether. And I said to John Orloff about the fact that you're anticipating that in a streaming, as Apple's a streaming service, people are going to be stopping it and starting it and watching it again and freeze framing it and going up and going, what's that there? Is that part? You just accept that's the rules of the game now?
Yeah, it's your guys, Paul. It's all these guys out there that are like that. That's what I'm doing it for. Honestly, I can't tell you how many times I'd mutter under my breath, I'm gonna get shit for this. But I really do try to get it right. But there are times when we just can't. I mean, I think Ty gave the example, like, he costed me in the first week of production. He's like, don't put the front of the engines on fire. And I'm like, okay. So I relayed that, but in the cut, guess what? There's a shot over an actor. Actually, there's a number of shots where you're in the flight deck and you're over the actor, and the actor's looking at the front of the engine, and you're like, I got to put something there. I can put smoke, or I can put fire. It's got to be exciting. But same thing with the rockets. I'll talk about that in a second. But I wanted to point this out real quick. Sorry, you guys. But this was really cool. This is Lieutenant Jefferson's sketch of the Toulon attack. He did this, and he's pointing out the radars. There was the different radars, 3 different sets of radars that we built into the Toulon attack. So we had this level of detail of a reference material that we would go off of. Let me just show you real quick. Where the heck is it? Well, I'll just talk through it real quick because I know your time is short. But the rockets, like when Macon shoots down the radar, it's supposed to be a strafing run. I know that, but it's just not that exciting to watch if it's just a bunch of sparks. So it was really just one of those, again, service the story, just take a little bit of creative embellishment because it's going to be fun to watch, to shoot, to see Macon take out a radar with a couple rockets, and there's a big explosion, and then he gets his wing clipped. So from that point forward, it's like, okay, well, if we're going to do that, then we need to put rockets on all the planes, all the P-51s, and then we can, we have creative license then to take out the other, when Gordon takes out the first radar, he's shooting a rocket, and it's helpful because the eye is being led to that radar. It's like, okay, the attack has begun. If it were just strafing, again, people would be looking every which way. So you're getting that sort of creative direction.
I think one of the things that you've absolutely amply got across to us today is that when we are seeing a scene and there may be one thing that the geeks have noticed is wrong, there's 99 other things in that same image that are correct. As John Orloff said, when you see those aircraft dropping out of the sky, they know which aircraft that is. You know which markings are on that aircraft. You know where it was in the formation. You know what happened to the formation after the aircraft left. All that stuff is plotted. And people said to John when he was on, is there any chance of this research work being available to people in the future? But it must be quite frustrating that all this work you've done and a percentage of it only is actually visible on screen.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of research. Let's see if I can put this on a slideshow while we're talking. We have just miles and miles of this stuff, but I don't know. I mean, they might do a book, maybe. I'm not sure. But yeah, it really is a wealth of information, I think. And that's largely attributable to our researchers and certainly John Orloff. I mean, John really set the stage. I mean, certainly Don with his book, but John got into the specifics of what we needed for the show, and that Bible was invaluable. And then certainly, taking his beautiful scripts and trying to be faithful to them. He often tries to share some of the credit. That's just his nature, but he's really the guy. I mean, he really his scripts were just beautiful, and it made my life a lot easier, because it was all we knew coming with that Bible that he had created, the research Bible, that everything he was saying was true, was accurate. And so I just needed to be faithful to that, and we did, for the most part, adhere to that.
Well, I think that's what John said, Donald Miller said. It's characterization, character development, and narrative comes first, and all the detail around that is important. But you've got to have a story, and I think that's we're now it's still brand new. People have just seen episode 9 or going to be watching it later today, and in a few months' time they'll be having watched it a second and third and fourth time, and maybe the long-term legacy of it is too early to predict where people are going to hold it in their affection. But what do you think it will stand for? In 5 years' time, will people be talking about the visual effects in this? Will it be? Is it cutting edge? I'm assuming it is.
It is, but I hope that they're not talking about the visual effects. For my goal on the show was, again, to be faithful to John's words. Certainly, I should say Gary Getzman, who is the showrunner on the show. Yeah. He was right there with me every day, keeping me on rails, and basically guiding a through line through the entire series. But my goal on the show was not to make this about visual effects. It was about to be faithful to the experience that they went through, right? And I think you've heard this before in more or less words, that I think, we just wanted to make sure that the audience witnessed and experienced or at least saw firsthand what these crewmen were going through. So you'll notice that we were very intentional about where we positioned cameras, that we were always grounding it inside a camera or inside the plane or attached to a plane, or if we had to jump wide for sort of a geography shot so we could orient the audience, that it could have been shot from another plane. It wasn't, there were never any of these magic camera moves where you're flying around the entire bombing group or a particular plane where the laws of physics are betrayed. We wanted to stay as physically accurate as we could. And so I'm hoping that people just sit back and enjoy it, as opposed to, and take it as a faithful representation of what these guys sacrificed, I think. And so that's really the goal there.
Thank you. Let's do one question, because you've got to go and catch a flight or go to the airport. So Banana Brooks is saying, does the director approve the final cut of the special effects? And obviously there were different directors over the course of the 9 episodes. And at what point does the influence of their special effects person cease?
Good question. It's different between film and TV. So this was my first foray into TV. With film, yes, the directors through post-production from beginning to end, and they're the final say in everything. In TV, it's Gary Getzman, who's the showrunner. So the directors at the end of production, the shoot, they assemble a cut, and then they hand that off to Gary, and then they go away. They go off onto another project. So Gary will, and he did with all the directors, he would show them assemblies of how the cuts were developing, and how he was refining them and adjusting things, and how, as the effects dropped into the cut, he would show them and get notes from them. But Gary was really the final say in that process, and I'm with him right up to the bitter end. So you know, I'm literally sending him 100 shots a day and getting notes, and then going back to my team and adjusting and going back and forth until we're done. And basically they just rip it out of our hands and say, you're done.
Wow. Well, that's been very revealing, and I know you've got to get off, but thank you very much for sharing some of your insight, your honesty. I think we'll all go and watch this again and look at those the little clips you showed of how you layer up the various levels of detail in those shots there. And I think most of us have been blown away by just how much detail went into what we perhaps saw as being very simple shots that it actually worked. So it's been fantastic talking to you, Stephen. And folks, thank you very much for your questions. I'll be back again next week with more content, but this is ending the first little run of Masters of the Air content. I'm hoping to bring you some more people involved in the production later on in the month. Yes.
Can I mention one last thing?
You can, absolutely.
One last, people never commented about the Chandelle we put into the Chandelle maneuver in episode 5. Look for that, Rosie. Nobody got that yet.
Okay, well,
we're trying to be very accurate about that. But anyway, sorry. Go on.
We'll check that out. But thanks for Stephen. I look forward to finding an excuse to talk to you in the future. And thank everybody for your questions. And I will see you all after weekend. This is Paul Woodard for World War II TV saying enjoy your couple of days off. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Bob.